Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my regular updates from the Capitol. I know we usually do these on Thursday. Scheduling-wise, it worked out a little bit better today on Wednesday. So I've got 3 or 4 items I want to hit at the top, and then I'll turn it over to Laura to go ahead and screen your questions or take your questions. First, and I feel like this is a repeat message that I've been making each and every week, literally now for months, and that is the clock is ticking on the United States aid to Ukraine. The United States and every member, I think, of the Senate, when Putin first invaded Ukraine, stood tall and said, "We will stand with you, Ukraine, a democracy. We will stand with you against the aggression from Russia." And the Ukrainian response has been remarkable. Ukraine, with an army much smaller than Russia's, but with our help and with European nations' help, have literally destroyed close to 80% of Russia's ground forces. Now, that doesn't mean that Russia still doesn't have a strong navy and air force and additional tanks, but literally 80% of the standing army and other ground forces pre-invasion have been taken off the field by the Ukrainians. Yet, Vladimir Putin believes that time is on his side. Russia has increased their production of drones and other munitions, and he thinks that he can outweight the West, and that the West will get tired. And unfortunately, you have the example where even the Europeans, which have got another 54 billion euros of aid being held up, I believe, by one nation state, Hungary, at this point, the main sponsor on the military side of aid has been the United States. And even though President Biden called for the $60 billion of additional military and economic aid to Ukraine in September, we're now at late January, and that aid hasn't arrived. As you all know, that has been tied in this supplemental aid package goes not only to Ukraine, it also goes to relief for Israel and for humanitarian needs in the Middle East. It also deals with the emerging challenges that in the Indo-Pacific, specifically around Taiwan. This is really the question about whether America is going to keep its word or not. And if we don't get this done, frankly, I'm not sure any nation state, friend or foe alike, would ever trust America again. It is that critical. Now, this whole package has also gotten tied up with the mess that's at the border, and is a mess. And I've strongly advocated for the administration to be very aggressive. We've got to make policy changes as well as procedural changes at the border so that we're not seeing literally 10,000 people a day try to cross the border, claiming asylum, claiming other things where we don't have an ability to process, and frankly 90% of these people get turned back when their processing is finished. We've got to change some policies. The remarkable thing that's happened has been, I think the president understands that. He's agreed to a whole host of things that even 3 months ago were not in the discussion. So my hope and prayer is this combined border Ukraine deal. It needs to get done. It needs to get on the floor of the Senate. I know my Republican colleagues are redebating part of this assistance for Ukraine today. Most of that driven by an isolationist wing that's being fomented by the former President Trump, who talks about America first, but America cannot be first if we don't keep our commitments to our friends around the world, and frankly, if we're not willing to stand up against aggression in the form that Putin has portrayed against Ukraine. So hopefully we'll get a couple of questions on that. I know I'm harping on this issue each week. Next issue is something I want to touch on that I raised earlier in the week when I was in Richmond, and that is the kind of double whammy we've got of the child care crisis in this country. When COVID came on a number of years back, it immediately put an enormous pressure on child care providers. Lots of them shut down. The federal government and again, working in a bipartisan way, this is actually with the Trump administration, literally put billions of dollars into childcare. And the number of childcare providers actually went up after we got through the first few months of COVID. The amount of training for childcare providers went up. The amount of subsidy to try to bring some of the costs went down. But unfortunately, those dollars are hitting fiscal cliffs. About half of the childcare money that was coming in from COVID expired at the end of last fiscal year, September 30 of last year. Now, obviously, the fact that we've not got that this fiscal year's budget done, some of that could be replaced once we get it done in early March. The second half of the child care money is running out September 30 of 2024. So we could see literally thousands of Virginia families. I think the estimate was around 30,000 Virginia families that have got child care now at an affordable basis could lose it. So what do we need to do? One, happy to see that this has got the attention of the legislators in Richmond, both the Democratic General Assembly and the Republican governor. There is a proposal for about $450 million to shore up child care in Virginia. I think that's important. Senator Kaine and I have put forward a request to get $16 billion of ongoing funding. That will still be less than what we were providing during COVID, but that $16 billion will go into those funding gaps. We've got to keep these child care centers open. We've got to keep them affordable. We've got to continue to go out and recruit and retain child care teachers. So I think this should be broadly bipartisan, although even something like child care is oftentimes not. So whether your reason is what the moral imperative is to make sure that kids can get the early child care they need to be able to go to school healthy and able to learn and prepared for kindergarten, that's one argument. The other argument is just a plain economic argument. We have still worker shortages. If we don't have adequate child care that's affordable, we're going to take a large number of workers, disproportionately women, out of the workforce. So we've got to do the continued funding at the federal level, on the operations level. We need to see the state and the governor of the General Assembly work through that budget and make that close to $450 million commitment. And then a final item that is related to this is there is a tax package that is being debated right now. Business incentives like the R&D tax credit, which I support, in a sense, in exchange for an expansion of the child tax credit. This is not about child care. This is about direct subsidy to low-income Virginians to receive a tax credit if they're working for multiple children. We'd had an expanded child tax credit during COVID. That expired over a year ago. That expanded child tax credit had literally taken half the kids in poverty out of poverty in America. We saw a lot of those kids slide back into poverty. What we're talking about in this current tax package, business tax credits for child tax credit, would improve poverty levels for about 16 million kids around the country. Literally about 400,000 of those would be completely taken out of poverty. This makes an enormous amount of sense, and it's another way to help those struggling families to be able to afford child care, or for that matter, just be able to afford, even when your kid's in school, the ability to, whether it's get that extra tutoring or sign up for band practice. These are dollars that are desperately needed, and again, my hope is that the House will take this legislation up quickly. It passed the House Ways and Means Committee at, I think, 40-3, broadly bipartisan. I think they'll get a similar broad bipartisan reinforcement here in the Senate, but this kind of legislation has to originate in the House. Final item, again on a hot button topic that I've talked about for literally since I've been governor, and that's telemedicine, teleconnect. How do we make sure, again, one of the opportunities that came out of COVID was a recognition that broadband is an essential requirement, and Virginia's well positioned to be the first nation to get 97, 98% broadband affordable coverage. But secondly, what you do on that broadband in terms of delivery of healthcare services, delivery of patient-doctor visits, particularly in terms of mental health visits. We expanded telehealth capabilities during COVID. Those expansion of those capabilities are due to expire at the end of calendar year 24. I'm working, again, very bipartisan on a basis to say, hey, let's take these lessons learned from COVID, where telehealth worked, where they were able to still, with appropriate controls, to even dispensing of certain medicines, try to make sure, again, we've seen in certain things like mental health that the take-up rate and the participation rate sometimes is even higher if you can use telehealth. Let's make sure we don't go backwards on that. And again, this is an item I've been working on since 2016 at the federal level, and I think my first telehealth exposure was 2003 when I was governor and made Medicare available for telehealth-related services. So this has been a passion of mine, along with that broadband connectivity for some time, but I wanted to raise that issue. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but if we don't continue this expansion of these telehealth services being offered that are then reimbursed, I think we would take a giant step backwards. One last, I said it was only three, but one last item that we're starting to see benefits from, and that is out of the legislation last year, the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of focus on green energy, but another piece of this was negotiation on drug prices. There's been about a dozen drugs where we've seen dramatic decrease in drug prices. The one that's probably the most prevalent is the insulin cost, lowering them for Medicare and seniors to $35 a month. And you know, we in Virginia will have a critical piece of that. I'm proud to say that I helped obtain federal funding for a tech hub that has combined some activity in Petersburg and Richmond, where a series of companies, one of them is named Civica, that is out trying to produce, insulin. I've got a type 1 diabetic daughter at that $35 a month price point. Boy, we get that done if it can be manufactured in Central Virginia through the Tech Hub grant, and we have to get some additional federal funding for that to become a reality. It will be great in terms of a relief for all kinds of families who've got diabetes type 1 or type 2. And for that matter, it will also be a great win for Virginia. But that was another project I was visiting on Monday. So me going a little bit long here, but Laurel, I'll turn it back over to you and happy to take your questions.
Just a reminder to please mute your devices while Senator Warner is speaking. If I call on you for a question, you can unmute and ask that. When you're unmuted, it causes some feedback for everyone on the line. Our first question is Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to ask you a question related to Ukraine. Is the U.S. now effectively out of money for Ukraine to send military equipment? And what, in your view, are the potential consequences of that?
You know, we are effectively out of money. We have gone through all the previous appropriations. There may be, in the small millions of dollars of shipments that could still be sent, but for all practical purposes, the aid that we have provided Ukraine is gone. And we see that in the battlefield, where we're seeing a ratio of, for every 5 Russian shells that bombard the Ukrainian lines, the Ukrainian supplies are down so low that they can only respond with 1 shell. We've seen the fact that Ukraine's ability to do much of any kind of offensive capabilities without additional munitions, without additional military assistance, has been cut back. And the truth of the matter is, Mitchell, if we don't get additional military aid to Ukraine, and if the Europeans don't honor their commitment as well, and they will honor once we honor our commitment, Putin's going to win. And the enormous sacrifice that Ukrainians have made in terms of decimating Russia's army will all be for naught. And what I am terrified of is the fact that a Ukraine that is controlled by Putin puts then even further Russian troops right up against NATO nations. And the ultimate fear I have is that within 6 or 9 months of Putin being successful in Ukraine, the fact that we might have American soldiers having to honor our commitment to NATO, because there's no indication that if the world wouldn't stand up and hold the line with Ukraine, that Putin won't think that he can pick off a small NATO country like Estonia or Latvia, or potentially go into Poland, and then we would have American and NATO soldiers in full armed conflict with Russia. That would be a disaster. It would be a cost 100 times greater than what we have borne to date, and would also put American lives in jeopardy. Again, I point back to the remarkable job the Ukrainians have done at decimating 80% of Russia's ground forces that existed pre-war. Russians have paid a high price, and that's been without the single loss of an American or NATO soldier. We wouldn't be able to say that if Putin is successful, and we don't honor our commitment.
Senator, our next question is Ian Duncan with the Washington Post.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for doing this. I gather that you had a chance to meet with the CEO of Boeing at some point recently, and just wondered what questions you'd had for him, and if you feel like you're getting the answers that you need from the company.
Les, I met with Dave Calhoun, the CEO of Boeing, this morning. I think most senators, are very concerned about the incident that took place on the Alaska Airlines, where literally a door blew out, and thank God there was no one sitting adjacent to that door. I guess what I'd say is I characterize one, that I do see a new level of transparency from Boeing. Remember, the management team that's in place now came in after the disaster of a number of years back, where there was a great deal of what I would call hiding the ball by the Boeing management. I don't believe that is taking place now. I think they are being very transparent in terms of trying to get at this problem. I expect that he's indicated that that the National Transportation Safety Board has to finish all of their review of all of the planes. He expects that review will be completed very shortly, and that these planes will be deemed safe again. One of the major concerns that I have, and I pressed the Boeing leadership on this, is that what happened, and again, this is prior to the current Boeing leadership, in an effort to cut prices, in an effort to cut costs, a number of years back, Boeing took a large part of their manufacturing supply chain, making a lot of the fuselages, and basically broke that part out and set it up in a separate company. And the company's named Spirit, and I believe it's based out of Kansas. Where a lot of this problem arose, it appears to be that in this effort for cost cutting, you had lesser quality controls. And I don't know how, if Spirit is going to be such an essential part of the Boeing supply chain, you can't sacrifice quality controls just because you've got a subcontractor in the process. So the leadership said they're looking at that. I hope there'll be substantial action taken. I do think one of the things that the leadership told me is they've added over 1,000 new employees on quality and safety assurance. That's good news, and they clearly are being much more transparent. But if that quality and safety assurance only applies to Boeing, but doesn't apply to one of their subcontractors, and a subcontractor that previously was part of Boeing, then that, in my mind, remains a problem. So I'm anxious to hear what actions they'll take on that regard.
Senator, our next question is Lisa Fletcher with WJLA.
Hi, Senator. I appreciate that you feel that your meeting with CEO Calhoun provided new transparency, but the reality is the congressional hearings after the two MAX crashes exposed a culture and the efforts to which Boeing went to shift blame rather than take responsibility. How much accountability are you demanding from the company in the wake of this latest disaster? And how did you express that to Boeing's CEO?
Again, let's remember, count me all in on condemnation of Boeing when they had the MAX disaster. Count me in on anger and frustration at the fact that Boeing tried to hide the ball. But I also think you have to acknowledge that virtually every senior management individual that was there when the MAX disaster took place is no longer there now. So there is a new team, and this new team's first or probably most significant case of a safety mishap. What I've seen, and again, I'm going to reserve judgment until we hear from the National Transportation Safety Board, is that how many of these deficiencies were there? What has been done to correct them? Are you willing to ground the entire fleet or the fleet of affected planes through this process? And that's what the representation was to me. How do we make sure, if NTSB comes back saying all's okay, when will that be? But the biggest concern I have, and the concern that I think has not been fully addressed, is if the previous regime, in an effort to try to do cost cutting and cost saving, decided to outsource a key and critical component of the Boeing supply chain, where you make the fuselages, which includes these doors, to an entity to try to save money, and this is that Spirit entity, and somehow that's where the mistakes were made. How do you maintain that? I mean, I don't even know how you can maintain that subcontractor relationship with Spirit if they don't have absolutely the highest safety concerns. Now, could you bring Spirit back into the Boeing family directly? Are there other options? The management team said they're looking at all this. I'm going to be very anxious to hear. I'd like to hear a comprehensive solution set that would potentially take out what appears to be a bit of a weak link here. But I will not. I agree with all of the critics of Boeing in terms of how they acted with the Supermax, but I also think you got to give folks a fair evaluation. If all of those folks have been left the company, and you now have the first kind of new regime safety incident, we got to judge them on how they respond to this incident. So far, I've seen a higher level of transparency, a greater willingness to work with the NTSB, a willingness to ground the fleet, and at least the problem that I see in terms of the Boeing's relationship with this sub named Spirit, at least it's being discussed. Now, if they don't come back with something that is very transformative around Spirit, that would ensure the highest level safety standards, then they're going to hear from me big time.
Senator, our next question is Michael Martz with the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Senator, good morning. I'm interested in your in visiting the arena proposal in Alexandria. I understand from both you and your remarks at the announcement and from talking to the governor that the two of you have talked about this property extensively before all this, and I'm interested in that history of looking at that property and why you think it's the proposed project could work there, and also what you think is going to be necessary to get it over the finish line in both Richmond and Alexandria.
Well, Michael, you and I may be some of the only people on the call old enough to remember the previous effort to put a stadium in this location, back when Governor Wilder and then owner of the Redskins, Jack Kent Cooke, tried. I was not involved with that project, luckily, and in many ways, it was kind of how not to do, because local community was not engaged, the local officials were generally not supportive. I think there are things different on this proposal. The the local government, the mayor and all of the council in Alexandria have been supportive. I actually think the financial structure that's been set up, where there's not an effort, at least from the Commonwealth standpoint, of writing a check to a sports owner to build this, but instead saying, no, sports owner, you have to put up $400 million upfront cash. We will then create this taxing district, and the taxing revenues and other revenues that will come from that district, will pay for the costs. I think some characterizations of that being the largest subsidy for stadiums is frankly just not accurate. None of these funds would exist if this project doesn't go through, and there's no kind of upfront obligation from the Commonwealth that I'm aware of. But where I have real concerns, and I warned the team, I warned the property developer, I've talked to the governor's office. You got to work with the neighborhoods. These are very, very active neighborhoods, number one. Number two, as somebody that lives in Alexandria, I've already heard from an awful lot of my neighbors, hey, we don't think this is a good idea. How are we not going to be, if we have to come from Washington to get to Old Town Alexandria, the Parkway is already part of a parking lot. How do you add all these additional cars or others? Number three, if we don't have increased support for Metro, this project doesn't take place. Because if Maryland, D.C., and Virginia don't chip in more on Metro, you're not going to have Metro service. It's been threatened that goes past 10 o'clock at night. Well, you can't have, frankly, that would affect the stadium downtown as well as this stadium. If people can't leave a game or a concert after 10 o'clock and get on Metro, then it's not sustainable. So what I've been waiting for, and you can count me in this category as well, as I understand the economic development reasons for this project, but I want to see the transportation solution. I want to see what else the state is going to do on Metro support. And it's that transportation set of solutions that so far have been mixing. I know there's a VDOT study going on. If I'm going to talk to my friends and neighbors about this project, the first, second, and third question is going to be, how do we make sure this is not going to disrupt the neighborhoods around it? How do we make sure it's not going to completely destroy the commute on the Parkway and Route 1? How is this not going to fundamentally alter the quality of life that particularly as an Alexandrian we've enjoyed so much? I do know from the standpoint of an Alexandria that has, you need an additional commercial tax base to kind of keep the quality schools and other quality investments. The out-year revenues that this would provide for Alexandria, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's one of the reasons why all the elected officials in Alexandria, at least city council-wise and mayor-wise and economic development, have been so supportive of the program. But I go back to the 92 effort. If you can't at least split the difference with the neighbors, then this project's going to have a really tough road to hoe.
Thanks.
Senator, our next question is Doug Sword with Tax Analyst.
Hello, Senators. I have a question on the tax bill. You had said that your hope is that the House takes this up quickly. Meanwhile, some Senate Finance Republicans are saying they want a markup. Given that the tax season starts January 29th, is there time or the need for a markup in your view?
Yeah, listen, I've got a couple things I'd love to add to this package. For example, a very low cost item to make sure that all the broadband money that's been deployed to all these jurisdictions around the country, around Virginia, isn't taxable. I mean, I think we just made a mistake on the broadband bill to clarify that. I mean, I've got some ideas around community development financial institutions that I've even got a separate pay for. So intellectually, would I love to have a markup? Absolutely. But the timing issue, and I'm not, I know the tax season starts on the 29th. My understanding is, and I don't have all the details on this, is that there was a little bit of give there. But I also get the fact that you want to avoid the the Christmas tree analogy, if this is the only tax vehicle moving and suddenly it gets loaded up with a whole host of other items. You know, the core of this deal, the R&D tax credit and the advanced deductibility issues. I mean, the R&D in my mind is more important for the child tax credit expansion and the LIHTC expansion. This is the low-income tax housing area, because one of the areas we have been sadly remiss on is housing. You know, even with all the trillions of dollars we spent during COVID, housing was always going to be next. We never did anything for housing, and we're still paying the price for that. But there is going to be this timing pressure. So first thing is let's see if we can. Let's hope the Speaker agrees to bring this bill up next week, and hopefully a great majority out of the House will speed its process here in the Senate. And some of my Republican Senate friends on finance I'm going to be talking to today and tomorrow.
Senator, our final question is Amy Knowles with Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I know you were a big supporter of the expanded child tax credit during COVID. So how is this new potential expansion similar or different from the one we saw a few years ago?
Well, the expanded child tax credit during COVID it covered all kids, the number of kids you had. It was a larger number. A lot of it was prepaid, so you would get it not at the end of the year when you do your tax filing, but on a monthly basis. And Amy, you know, as you know, it took about half of the kids in poverty, half of the kids who were in poverty out of poverty. That was the good news. And one of the things that frankly surprised the heck out of me was that when it expired, we thought we would get overwhelmed with people complaining. And I think people were still in kind of the COVID fog, and they didn't know, you know, what was the source of this funding versus the source, for example, of expanded unemployment benefits or other dollars that were coming out. And frankly, it died. So this is a more modest version. It does move from child tax credit, which exists now for families that actually make quite a bit of money. For just a single child, it would take this up to multiple children. It wouldn't be as large a dollar amount as was in the COVID expanded child tax credit. And the payment time would be when you file your taxes. So it wouldn't be this kind of monthly or quarterly advance the way the COVID CTC was. Is it perfect? No, but I'm a big believer that if we can affect 16 million children in this country and literally take 400,000 of those children fully out of poverty by this expansion, I'll take that. And you know, this is the epitome of the perfect could be the enemy of the good. And you know, let's make sure we get these kids the help they need. Let's also make sure that we, you know, put in the additional resources on the low-income tax credit so we can build some additional low-income housing around this country, which is also in sad shortage. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy, and I guess I'll come back and keep pitching Ukraine until I get a question asked. Well, actually, the first one was Mitchell, you asked. So thank you all.